the City of Opa-locka joint audit workshop. We called this workshop in response to a meeting we had with our audit committee where we wanted to get an update on how we've been performing on the last 4 audits with this new commission and new audit committee. So we called this joint workshop to go through that information, and we look forward to the information that will be provided today for us. So with that, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Vice Mayor Williams,
Here.
Mayor Pikett,
Here.
and just for the record, if IT can confirm if my Keisha Finn is on the line. Ashley Hepburn, Dorothy Johnson. Thank you.
Madam Johnson, could you respond just to make sure your mic is on and you're part of the meeting? Are you available? Okay, well, we'll come back to that. With that, Madam Vice Mayor Williams, could lead us in invocation.
Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for the many blessings you bestowed upon us this day and every day. Lord, we ask that you bless this commission, the city, and all that works for the city of Opa-locka, and allow us to do your will in your way. In these name we ask, amen.
Pledge of allegiance. All right, public comments for agenda items are open. Public comments is, Madam Clerk, could you go over any the protocols, public comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, good evening. Due to COVID-19, the City of Opa-locka Commission will hold its meetings in person while still allowing virtual participation via Zoom. In-person meetings will be held in the Commission chambers at Sherbondi Village, 215 Purvis Avenue, Opa-locka, Florida. Space for in-person attendance is very limited due to COVID-19 social distancing. Members of the public wishing to address the Commission are strongly encouraged to participate virtually by registering at least 2 hours prior to the scheduled meeting time at publiccomments@opalockafl.gov. At this time, Mr. Mayor, there are no public comments.
All right, public comments are open from the floor. Public comments are closed. All right, let's jump right into this presentation. We have our auditor, Anthony Brunson, PA. He's been responsible for doing our audits over the past 4 audit cycles. Long-time auditor for the city of Opa-locka, here to present to us, the public and the commission, on the audit findings, recommendations, and any guidance to this commission. Mr. Brunson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, commissions, staff, and citizens of Opa-locka. As mentioned, we're here to kind of conduct an audit workshop, but I always don't like conversations going one way, so we like to get you engaged in this process to the extent we can. Next slide. Just to kind of go through the agenda, we're going to talk, going to introduce the team members on the engagement this year. We'll go through some objectives of audit, types of audits, the processes. We'll go through some opinions. And if I may, I want to take the liberty of about an 8-minute video to actually talk about a CAFR, which is a comprehensive annual financial statement. And that's the kind of the benchmark, the standard, the goal I know that we would all be targeting. Following that, we'll get through the pre-audit meeting topics, the things that we talk about prior to starting or starting an audit process, and certainly open up for questions. In fact, after each segment, if there are questions, feel free to just jump right in and ask. And lastly, I don't know how we're going to do this. Next section. Then we'll talk a little bit, about the history of Opa-locka and some of the financial audit matters that we've addressed in the past. We'll go through a series of the audit opinions, some of the adjustments, the internal control comments, with closing comments. And that would conclude the presentation. Okay, so kind of getting right to it. The first section, just some of the team members are here. Next slide. Tedito Gasti is going to be the audit manager this year. CPA, 15 plus years of experience. Joined by Karen Grace, who's been here in the past. She's a senior auditor, been with us for the past 4 years, and all of our team members on video. I know Louis and Carl are there as well, who are the assigned staff members at this time. So just to kind of put faces with the name, and all members of the firm are accounting graduates from accredited universities. Most of these folks are MBAs or CPAs. Okay. Just wanted to talk a little bit about an objective of an audit. And I put it in a question form. Is the objective auditing an organization's financial statements required by local and state law? Is an objective to conduct a financial investigation of the organization's books and records? Or is the primary goal of an audit is to, let the auditors work independently, objectively, to review the financial statements and express an opinion based on the results of the evidence obtained? And lastly, would the objective be to perform checks against internal control policies and procedures of an organization? So we kind of look to the DS, and is there best answer? Or any thoughts on which of these could potentially be the best explanation of an audit?
I would say all of the above.
And you're right. I mean, it's just dependent on the nature of an audit. And the next page, I just wanted to highlight the different types of audit engagements. You can have an external audit, internal audit, forensic audit, statutory audit, financial audit. You can have a tax audit, compliance audit. There are about 14 or 15 different types of audits that you can actually be engaged to do. And kind of going back to that objective, the objective ties directly into the nature of that audit. In the case of the city, obviously, it is an external audit, and it's typically financial audit in nature. So item 3 on the prior slide would kind of describe it being a compliance audit, objectively done on your financial statements. But with cities, you also have compliance audits. We have to be sure that your grants, your state and local grants, we're satisfying the requirements of those as well. Could even segue some into statutory basis based upon bonds that you may have or incurred, or specific funding from the county. So it could typically reach at least 3 of these buckets or more. Okay. The next slide talks about the audit process. It says key audit process, and I know it's a little challenging. Hopefully you guys have the handouts as well.
We do.
Process begins with planning. Prior to coming on site, typically auditors do a lot of planning internally, and you can see some of the planning steps there. We're gathering data, information from past audits. We call it building an information base. We identify risk. We're sending out confirmations and things of that nature as well. So it's a number of things that happen prior to us coming on site. The next step you see there is an interest conference or interest meeting. We call it a pre-audit meeting, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. So with the pre-audit meeting, we're going through the audit plan, some of the scope issues, timing issues, et cetera. Then the next steps, as you see, we come out and we conduct our field work. This is when the actual testing began. We're doing interviews, usually testing transactions, just building again certain reconciliations, documenting processes, etc. So those steps are followed by an exit meeting. And at that exit meeting, we discuss all the results of the audit that we have. And as I always share with our staff members, as auditors, we kind of come out of the period of time and do work. Folks are here every day, so things that we see could create misunderstandings. So we want to be sure we present what we believe to be the facts. We ask the questions, we get the feedback, and as a result of that exit conference, we conclude whatever decisions are going to be made in that respect. And then we get into the reporting. The reporting is the actual preparation of documents. We, do all the reports. There could be reports on the compliance reports that we talked about. Obviously, the financial statements are reports, internal control reports, a number of the reports that we would have in connection with the city's audit. And subsequently, if there were comments or recommendations, we typically would do some follow-up to see how those items are progressing. So that is the overview of an audit process in a nutshell. I don't know if there are any questions at that time.
And just for the sake of this workshop, feel free to make any comments anytime Mr. Brunson pauses. So far, I love the thoroughness of this presentation and the overview. So thank you very much, Mr. Brunson, for preparing the audit presentation in this way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so the outcome, what auditors do are render opinions. And there are 4 types of audit opinions that are shared there with you. We have an unmodified opinion. You hear the term, that's generally considered a clean report. And this is the type of report that auditors, we usually give, is that clean report. And it's really what most companies expect with their audit process. And this is in essence saying the auditor believes the operations are in good compliance. Everything's in order in connection with the audit process.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brunson. I do have a question from former Commissioner or Board Member Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So good afternoon to everyone. My question is the recommendations for each of the audit that we're going over now, the management summary, how do we go back and make sure that the commission, because those are the ones, that's the body that address all those concerns. Have we done that for the 4 that we are covering, or this is just an overall view of all 4 of them?
Well, at this time, this is, we're just addressing some of the individual comments. When you talk about addressing past issues, that's something we would do at the beginning of the process. We talked about that planning process, but in earnest, it's really based upon, the commission, your audit committee, your manager, monitoring that activity as the year goes on, as to where things are based upon whatever recommendations were made. And if you could just hold that thought until a little later, you'll see, some of the past comments that we have, and we can talk, individually. We can give our belief of what the status of those comments are, and or obviously we can turn to your staff members.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Also, I would like to recognize Commissioner Taylor, Commissioner Burke, and Commissioner Davis, and Board Member Hepburn on the Audit Committee joining us. Mayor, proceed.
Okay. So we were talking about that unmodified opinion, which is the clean opinion, clean report, saying you satisfy things. And from there, you go to what's known as a qualified opinion. And the qualified opinion starts addressing potential concerns that may exist with the audit. Something's being qualified specific transaction, some issue, information not available, information not supported, could lead to, a qualified opinion. The third opinion, here we have a disclaimer of opinion. And a disclaimer usually means that, I don't know, the auditor is kind of distancing himself from the financial statements. Is really not, in a position to give an opinion because there's maybe some limitations of access to information, access to, certain reports, explanations that may be given weren't comfortable with the answers in connection with matters. So, they just have to decipher things that are being presented to them and observe what's going on to try to see whether or not they can express, an opinion. And typically when there is a disclaimer, they're not expressing any opinion whatsoever. The fourth opinion, I guess, in the most, for lack of a word, damaging opinion, is an adverse opinion. And the adverse opinion really is saying that there's some high level of material misstatements with the financial statements. So the information that's been presented is just definitely wrong. And so they just say, no, clearly it raises a red flag and, there's just some gross misstatements in the information and the numbers. So as you kind of bridge the gap from disclaimer, it's like we haven't really identified anything that's necessarily wrong, but we haven't gotten the kind of supporting information to prove that the information is right. Versus when you get to the adverse, it's just saying clearly these numbers aren't right based on information we have, and it's kind of like passing on misinformation to whoever the readers of those financials may be. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is, we talk about a comprehensive annual financial report, and this is the benchmark, the gold standard. I think I put in your information. You should have what that certificate, the CAFR, it's called a Certificate of Excellence for Financial Reporting. It just meets all the benchmarks, all the industry standards. It's a huge checklist of information and things that are tested and checked to get there. And I've shared with you one, I believe, from Miami-Dade County and another city that's in the package. But if we're allowed, I'd like to run the video. It's about 8 minutes. And it really kind of breaks down the different sections of that, of getting this Certificate of Financial Excellence on your CAFR, which is your annual financial report.
In this presentation, we will discuss the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, otherwise known as the CAFR. CAFRs, or the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, are prepared by most larger governments, so they may not be required under governmental accounting. However, most larger governments will go through the full Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports. The CAFRs are a government's official annual reports. They're prepared and published for public record. The CAFR includes minimum requirements of general purpose external financial reports. So these are going to be the minimum requirements. And you'll recall, again, the CAFR is going to go above and beyond the minimum requirements. But those minimum requirements are management's discussion and analysis, the MD&A, basic government-wide and fund financial statements and related notes, required supplementary information, also known as RSI. These are the minimum requirements. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, the CAFRs, will go above and beyond the minimum requirements, also including the individual fund and combining financial statements, schedules, narrative explanations, statistical section, other material management deems relevant, so other items that is deemed relevant by management, and if the CAFR contains audited financial statements, the auditor's report should also be included. So if the government entity had a financial audit, external auditor, then of course the audit report included as well. CAFR sections, this is going to be a common type of test question within governmental accounting. So you want to know the 3 sections for the CAFR, which is the introductory section, the financial section, and the statistical section. The introductory section, because it is often not covered by the auditor's report, it can be more subjective in nature, possibly including forecasts and expectations. In other words, when we think about the auditor's report, it's not something that's going to be including the introductory section. The auditor's report giving an opinion on the financial statements then means that those financial statements have to be in accordance with whatever the requirements are of the audit in order for the opinion to be given. The introductory section is going to be outside of the auditor's report, providing the ability to be more subjective in nature. So you can give things like opinions. So we can have forecasts into the future. Obviously, when we consider forecasts into the future, there's going to be more projections into that. We're going to be thinking about what could happen as opposed to reporting on what has happened in more concrete type terms. We're projecting out into the future. Introductory section includes the table of contents, letter of transmittal, other material deemed appropriate by management. These are basically like the minimum type of requirements for the introductory section. The financial section, this is going to be the minimum content for the financial section, including the auditor's report, the MD&A, that's the management's discussion and analysis, often called the MD&A, the basic financial statements, government-wide financial statements, the fund financial statements, notes to the financial statements, required supplementary information other than the MD&A, including the budgetary comparison schedule and combining statements of individual fund statements and schedules. The statistical section, typically having 5 categories, should present the most recent 10 years of data for each. 5 categories including financial trends information, revenue capacity information, debt capacity information, demographic and economic information, and operating information. Financial trends information shows how government's financial position has changed over time, focuses on showing the trend in fund balances and net position, and prepared at fund level as well as at the government-wide level. Fund financial statements, so we're thinking about the fund side of things. When we think about the financial statements, we often think about the 2 sides. We got the government-wide type financial statements on the government-wide level, then breaking that information into the funds. So the fund financial statements prepared for all governmental funds and proprietary funds. So when we think about the types of funds, the category of funds, we have the governmental funds, largest groups of funds, those being on the modified accrual basis. Proprietary funds, those are going to be those types of funds that are going to be similar to for-profit in some ways, and therefore we used an accrual basis in those types of funds. Notice what's not included here, those being the fiduciary funds, where there's some kind of fiduciary responsibility, typically funds in which the governmental unit is accounting for assets or tracking assets or doing something with regards to assets that don't belong to the government or the citizens of the government, but belong to someone else, and they're in essence acting as an agent for them. So the fiduciary funds then we don't see here, aren't included. We have the balance sheet, the governmental funds. So when we think about the balance sheet on the governmental funds, we have the balance sheet for the governmental funds, that being the largest groups of funds. Statement of revenue, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for the governmental funds. Note, when we think about the governmental funds, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance is, of course, similar to the income statement, the timing type statement. We can tell from it that we're talking about an accrual basis item here, or accrual basis funds, the governmental funds being accrual basis because of the term expenditures as opposed to expenses. Fund balances are classified according to constraints on use. So the constraints on use, non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. So when we think about the fund balance, assets minus liabilities gives us that fund balance. We then have the categorizations of those fund balances as either non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. And if we think about those, you'll recall that if we think about how people are going to want to spend money, they're going to look at the fund balance, which represents the assets minus the liabilities, and then try to think about what can they do with that money, because it represents assets minus liabilities. We got to then say, okay, these type of fund balance, this portion of the fund balance is going to have different types of restrictions related to it, which will give some determination of what the planning can be for the future with regards for it. And that includes the non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned being those types of categories of restriction. The general fund is the only fund that can have a positive unassigned fund balance. So the only fund that can have a positive unassigned fund balance is the general fund, the main governmental fund, the one which every type of governmental entity that uses fund accounting will have at least one of, the general fund, and only one of. Then we have the reconciliation process. We have to have a reconciliation process between the government-wide type of activities, the governmental actions column, and the fund financial statement. So we want to think about these being reported in two different ways again. We got the government-wide level of things, and then we've got the fund level of things. We want to reconcile the two. Why don't they reconcile? Well, mainly because the governmental type of activities are on an accrual basis, and the funds, particularly the governmental funds, are on a modified accrual type of basis. And therefore, we got the differences that are going to be a result of the fact that we're using two different types of accounting bases. And we want to be able to take these two things which should reflect the same type of information and be able to reconcile what those differences are. And if we can reconcile exactly what those differences are, basically just listing out exactly what the differences are going from one balance to the other and saying this is why the changes are there. It's due to these different types of accounting basis, accrual and modified accrual. Then we can have confidence that a double check, in essence, that the information is recorded properly, everything is included within the two formats. So things that could be different between the two are things like disposition of capital assets, outlays of capital outlays and depreciation. These are items that are going to be different because on the accrual basis, obviously, we're going to record the capital assets as an asset on the balance sheet. And on the modified accrual basis, we don't have long-term assets like capital assets, property, plant, and equipment, or capital assets. And we record them instead as a flow type of activity. And so we're going to have that difference then in terms of the timing difference of when things are going to happen. On the under normal accrual government-wide activity, we're going to record it as we would expect when we have an asset. We put it on the books, then we depreciate it. Modified accrual basis for the governmental funds, we're going to record it not as an asset on the books, but possibly record it as an expenditure at the point in time that we have the capital assets rather than depreciating it. So we'll have to account for that. That'll be one of the reconciling differences. We could add differences for the retirement of debt, inter-fund transfer, accrued expenses, insurance of long-term debt. So anything related to long-term debt is going to be another thing that could be a difference because, of course, once again, on the accrual basis, we would expect long-term debt, such as a bond payable, to be on the books as a liability. We have a bonds payable on the books as a liability. But when we go to the modified accrual for the governmental funds, we're not going to be recording long-term liabilities and maybe putting the flow in the activities in more of a temporary type of account. As we record that under a modified accrual basis. And then again, we're going to have that difference that we'll have to reconcile for within the reconciliation process to tie these two things together. In this presentation.
Okay. The best bedtime stories, right? Reading accounting and CAFRs and that sort of thing. But as you can see, it's pretty exhaustive in terms of the information that's needed and captured to achieve what I call the gold standard within the industry. Oftentimes I share with colleagues that do public companies, it's called the Securities and Exchange Commission reports on them and have oversight on them. But unlikely, they don't have really anything on a governmental set of accounting information. Is just as challenging, just as detailed to really put a positive picture or give the picture in respect to what your government is like. Having a CAFR obviously helps with your bonding and debt you see. Folks providing grants and information to you if you meet all of these standards. So as I mentioned, we had what the actual certificate looks like there in a couple occasions. Okay, any questions at this time as we move to the next section?
Thank you. You're doing great so far.
Hearing none. Okay, we talked about looking at that audit process, what a pre-audit conference looks like. Okay, this is when we initially meet with your finance team and our audit committee members, finance team, manager, and others, and we start identifying the process. The next slide, it talks about the scope. We reconfirm the scope of the examination. So in this case, with Opa-locka, with specific to the city, we say we're going to conduct this audit pursuant to generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards. We do a review of internal controls governing the financial operations, as well as the internal control environment that ensures compliance with your laws and regulations. If you got grants from the state or the Fed, there's also compliance of these programs to the extent, if it applies. Also, in accordance with all of this, there are rules of the Auditor General. So Florida statutes that you're subject to, that is also within the scope of the audit of a city like yours. And again, if there are any other program-specific audits, sometimes you get grants. What's common today is you hear the Children's Trust, they will want their individual audit. If you have bond issues or debt issues, oftentimes those agencies would also want a specific audit to satisfy their guidelines. So we go through that to identify the scope. Next slide. Then we talk to management. And these are the things that we'll be doing very soon with your team. We talk about organizational changes, the management team, the council, attorneys, reaching out to potentially identify any litigation that's going on. In connection with the council, we're actually looking for conflicts of interest, seeing if there are matters that have been identified as, potential conflicts, or, as we go through the audit process, we're looking at your relationships. We check the state of Florida, what is that? SunBiz, and see what associations you may have. And then we look at those vendors to see if, any of those companies are doing business with the city. So in addition to any non-disclosure or conflict of interest you may sign, internally, it is a check that's done by the auditors as well. We get into revenue streams as well as expense side of things, revenue sharing issues, property tax issues, utility taxes. We're just trying to get to trends and any changes that may present themselves in connection with the audit process. Next slide. Then as we work through that, we start putting together an audit timetable, right? In the interim, we start with being sure we, get the engagement letter, PBC letter, or schedules prepared by client. So these are schedules and matters that we request from your staff, things like your working trial balance, bank reconciliations, other reconciliations. We start sending out confirmations to confirm items that are likely in your accounts, whether it's with the county in terms of your property tax rolls and property taxes, or some of the grants you have, the state with some of the revenue monies that you have. We get an actual confirmation from them to substantiate the numbers that you're reflecting in your books. And then there's a series of other interim procedures. We look at your IT systems. We may do sampling, capital additions if there were any major fixed assets during the course of the year. Again, we talk about debt, federal and any other audits or grants. I'm sorry, federal or state grants that you may have, any third-party audits that may have come in and looked at the organization. We try to pull all of those reports and take a look at them. And to the commissioner earlier, that's when we start going through the status of the prior year comments and where, you know, their stand. Had they been corrected? What progress has been made on any potential items we may have identified in prior years? Okay, next slide. Actually, then we actually put that timetable together. You know, we actually target a timeline when we expect to complete year end, when we should have a draft for you, you know, when we're going to present to your committee, commission, et cetera. So there's a whole timetable that follows. Okay, other matters, the next slide that we may be discussing, you know, was there any fraud during the course of the year? Annually, you file your annual financial report with the Department of Financial Services. That report provides a lot of information on you as well, as far as financial information. So again, you know, these are a number of things we look at. It talks about the other audit areas. You know, if there's anything of specific audit focus, I may have set with and I have set with some of the commissioners in the past, the mayor, and say, is there a specific area that you'd like us to take a look at this year? Any concerns that you know, would have throughout the course of the year? And lastly, we have a portal where all the information is sent. And in that portal, your team member, your staff has access to it, the auditors have access to it, and any other folks that are assigned. So we can actually monitor, you know, what's come in, what kind of information we have. So it removes doubt when we start saying, well, we sent you this, we sent you that. And okay, let's go to the portal and take a look. Okay. Is that a pause or? So after we do all of those steps, then we start walking through what's known as Gasbys. These are the pronouncements that regulate the industry. And every year we get a new series of Gasbys and pronouncements. In essence, what we're looking for is to see if you're compliant with it. Have you implemented these generally government auditing standards, basically, or what these represent. So we see whether or not, you know, the city has implemented them, what stage they are, where are you in the process of Gasby implementations. And the last major step in this is we talk about what the deliverables need to be. But at the conclusion of this audit, what are we going to be providing you? You know, we're going to do obviously an opinion on the financial statements that are prepared by your staff. We'll do management letter comments, obviously recommendations. The uniform guidance is a single audit. We have also data collection forms or other, as we talked about earlier, specific reports if needed. So, you know, that's really is captured in the audit plan that we'll walk through your team with in preparation and planning for that audit. So again, is there at this time any questions? Or?
I see none, but I do want to say much respect for providing this introductory information. I know now we're about to get into the details of the audit, but this is exactly what we needed and we wanted as an audit committee, and this as a commission, just so that we understand this information, and you're doing a great job breaking it down, making it simple. So much respect, Mr. Brunson, and I don't see any other comments or questions, so you may proceed.
Okay, so with that, in planning, again, this audit process, we start looking at some of the history of the financial matters with the city. We start looking at, you saw in that CAFR, some trends. So we start looking at potential trends. And next slide, one of those trends would be your property tax base, as you can see. We did a trend from 2016 to looking through 2020, and I think it's common sense that you'd want your tax base growing. So it's great to see that the tax base has been growing. So and this is in millions. Well, so it's in 2016, you had a property tax base of around 704 million. So in 2020, that tax base has grown to 1.1 billion. So it's a real positive item for the city, right? Want that tax base to continue to flow. Why? Well, one of the primary reasons is your property taxes. You know, that's some of the core revenue stream, or a core revenue stream of the city. Now, as you look at your trend in this respect, it was going in the positive direction here as well. Then it took a dip. Now, it's going to be real interesting. That's one of the things we would investigate as an auditor. Why do your property tax assessments keep going up, but there seemed to have been a little dip in your actual property tax revenues? Right away, so in the planning session, when we're writing our audit program steps, we say, hey, this is an item that certainly needs to get investigated. Next slide. Is that governmental activities? I'm losing myself here. Okay, governmental activities. All revenue streams. You see, these are your charges for services. So, you know, we've seen the property tax revenue take a little dip. Some of the charges for services also have a slight decrease. You know, it went positive. I want to make sure I'm talking about the right stuff. Charges for services. So, what sort of things would go into your charges for services? Sorry? Building and licenses. So it shows the activity that's going on, you know, within the city. Again, you know, it was pretty healthy 4 years ago, but it's taking a downward trend. The next slide. I ain't out of order. That's why I'm having this challenge here. Again, we started, we peaked, came down, now it seems to be going back up. And this particular one are your grants and your contributions. So obviously these would be grants from the state or other parties, federal, county, otherwise. So, I mean, again, these are all the trends that we would look at. It would be on the revenue side and the governmental side. So it's important.
I'm looking at this slide, and it looks, the title and everything is the exact same as the one before. So how do we tell a difference? Oh, okay.
At the bottom, you can see the actual. Okay. Yeah, that's why I'm walking over.
All right, so bottom left, it says what the revenue is exactly.
Yeah, the bottom left corner, what the revenue would be or what the expense would be. And it shows your the trends. So again, we would look at these trends in the audit process to identify risks, you know, identify relationships, why things change the way they change. You know, it would be one of our core tasks to understand and gain explanations for these items.
And I do have a comment from Board Member Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the auditor. So in 15 to like 17, we had a grant writer, which had a lot of federal grants. So is the footnote somewhere in your summary or somewhere to indicate that? Because it seemed like it's new players in the Department of Finance that may not have captured that. And I know in 17, from my notes I'm looking at now from a couple of meetings in 17, that's when we lost our grant writer and went into the police department, which now we don't have a grant writer. So I see a real big dip there. And I want to make sure that, some of that was captured. Thank you.
Okay. It is our, as auditors, we don't give commentary in the report as to why, but it would be in our work papers explaining the reasons for these changes. You and your responsibility, in my opinion, as a board member, would be to understand that as well. Since you lost your grant writer, obviously it has had an impact. You can see the impact on your revenue stream. So those are the kind of analytics that we would do. We identify in our work papers, and it could be the reason, I call it the nexus, as to why that revenue stream went down. We saw that person went away. We saw they were preparing grants in the past. So as we come to the current year, okay, now that person's no longer here. So as many pursuit of grants didn't take place.
Okay, and that probably will be comments from the previous board. I'm new on the board, and this is my second meeting.
Okay. No, but that's a very good point. That's
yes.
The reason why things change. It's an excellent point. It's exactly the kind of thing we would look for as auditors as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's also important to note that in 2016, that is when we executed the Financial Oversight Board agreement with the governor's office, which did restrict a lot of funding from us. So in terms of grants and other things. So
that's correct. Okay, so you can go through the slides and, again, we just continue to look at trends. We have some, I guess, when we get to the expenditure side, we get to the public safety groups, the other groups, the transportation groups. You guys can all, the park, it says culture and recreation. So we see how expenditures trended. So these are all major, I don't want to say major funds, but items of interest, and how we would analytically look at these trends and how we ultimately approach audit process. So we continue on until we get to the proprietary activities. It says overview of revenues, proprietary activities. And one thing to point out is charges for service. These are your water and sewer funds, right? So going back again in 2015, it was up around $10 million, a little more. And now 2018, that number is $8.1 million. So again, we are in there trying to investigate the trends, seeing what happened. What were the billing rates? What's an average billing rate? What were the number of customers? To hone in on potential reasons for these changes in an audit process. I think the one breaks out, the next slide, it says operating expenditures for the proprietary. So it actually breaks out the expenditure side for the water and sewer and the storm water. And an interesting one was solid waste. In 2015, there seemed to have been solid waste. 2016, none. 2017, solid waste came back. We had some contracting activity, just going on recall. And then 2018, it went away again in terms of expenditures. So I think we ended that contract, right?
yes.
With the solid waste go. Again, see, it shows in numbers. It clearly shows in the numbers. Okay, cities audit opinions. Just give you, and we talked earlier about opinions and where we were in 2015 and 16, we had a disclaimer. And if you recall back in those times, there was turnover in the staff. So we didn't, the folks that you had really weren't familiar with some of the information. There were some outside reviews going on. So a lot of the records had been moved around. A lot of the supporting documents didn't seem to no longer be around. So we were kind of forced to move to this opinion of a disclaimer. But as we move forward, you know, we show some progress in 2017 and 2018 to a level of a qualified opinion. And the primary reason for the qualification at this time is your fixed assets, your physical assets. Your assets are the major balance sheet item for not only your general funds or governmental funds, but your water and sewer funds. And one of the rules says, well, you know, we should take a physical inventory periodically. So since we haven't had a physical inventory in connection with the city in some time, it is just difficult to say whether things are there or not there, the valuation of those things. Some of the rules change that you should also inventory your infrastructure assets, you know, your streets, some of your streets, your lights that the city would own on its property. So it takes you know, once I think that process gets accomplished, you know, the city would be in a position to move to that unmodified opinion. But, you know, until that time, it's just real challenging for an auditor, no matter the auditor, to kind of say, you know, all the assets that are shown in the books, that they're still around.
I do have a question. You said that the laws changed and now they want to inventory infrastructure too, and not just physical assets. Is that a recent change, and is that something that we need to
That
do
happened
moving
about
forward?
5 years ago. So it's, you know, it's just one of those things. You have none of your infrastructure in your physical assets.
So that's something we need to start doing now, is to inventory our infrastructure.
Yes, there are professionals that do that. And I always say the best source to begin with is go to the League of Cities. You know, they would, you know, have contact with folks that are specialists in doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, I
It's
asked that
kind of like,
question
how do
because we
you,
literally just approved a contract to do an inventory of physical assets for this upcoming audit so that we could reach that unmodified opinion. And to hear that now we may need to get infrastructure as a part of that, I wanted to just want to know whether or not that would affect an unmodified opinion in this year's audit if the infrastructure is not a part of that. And whether or not we need to move with that, or is that something that we can do in the next audit to ensure that we get the best opinion possible?
well, the nature of the qualification would lessen, but yeah, we would really need to get all of the city's assets. There's value, obviously, in your streets, your roads, your lights, your sewer systems, you know, all of those type assets. So the valuation of those assets should be carried on the books as well.
Okay, but are you basing that on, is it necessary? I think that's what the mayor is.
Yes,
asking.
it's necessary to satisfy the Governmental Accounting Standards Board rules.
Because you said that it was for this rule started 5 years ago.
Right, it hasn't been done since the beginning of the rule being implemented.
So in order for us to come under compliance, we need to actually get our infrastructure audited as well.
That's correct.
I think, Mayor.
I don't know if you have anything there.
So yes, speaking to the mic and introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, and guests. So the firm that the city, my name is Jerry Lazar. I'm over the Finance Department. So the city recently engaged with HCA Asset Management, and the role of the work that they're going to be doing for us is to provide an inventory asset as well as infrastructure items for the current year. So it does include the infrastructure component as well. Just want to make sure that we clarify that.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You guys have it covered. And
Awesome.
that's really the gap right now to this qualified to get that unmodified audit opinion.
And I do have a comment from Board Member Johnson.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor and team. Somewhere in records, we have done inventory of all our properties and everything, at least I know up until like 15. So for 15 and 16, there was a resolution, maybe you can go through archive and go through the clerk's office to pull that information up, because the legislation, the Florida statute, what the CPA is bringing up, that was executed 5 years ago. And I think that was just the exit of Attorney Joe Gellert was bringing that information to the commission. So I'm not for sure and have not kept up with it for the facilities, but I know when we completed and I went to Tallahassee to speak on the historic funds for the old city hall, that was a requirement. So somewhere that information is archived. That just need to be some research need to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. We talk a little bit about the audit adjustments. And again, there was turnover in the staff. So there were several audit adjustments made, to the trial balances over the years. And, it's gotten better. And we're very hopeful that in 2019 that this problem is behind us. Just to point out that we continue to be a work in progress in terms of identifying adjustments. And what happens is we get an original trial balance from staff, and as a result of audit steps or even some of their reconciliations, there's a series of adjustments to bring numbers up to where they actually are. So it's a series of reconciliations or based upon whatever evidence we're documenting. Right, the final grouping here talks in terms of some of the city's internal control comments over the years. The first group actually addresses some of the comments that were made. And as everyone is aware, in 2014, there was discussion about the deteriorating financial condition, which brought on the oversight board and that activity. We talked about timeliness of recording transactions, financial policies and procedures manuals. I think that's been one that's been kind of carrying forward. The Auditor General came in 2017 and had a number of findings. 2017, we talked about strengthening the staff resources in the accounting department, the physical inventory you see there, reconciliations of cash accounts, and it's really, timely reconciliations. Back during that period of time, I know there were challenges. You guys were implementing budgets. You had an oversight board. There were just a number of things were going on. So the day-to-day kind of slipped through the cracks in that process. And finally, we talked in terms of some of the payroll processing and personnel file maintenance. Now, the status that you see there is whether it was cleared or whether it was still relevant as of the 2018.
So if I'm understanding you right, this slide here and information, these are the findings that we as a city need to look into and to resolve as soon as possible. Is that what these are the pull out of those findings from the past audit reports?
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Through the mayor.
Yes.
Board Member Hepburn, I have a question, not so much for the auditor, but more for management. As you look at the list, and first of all, to the auditor, I want to say, and to the city, you've done a good job of going from disclaimer qualification to a qualified opinion. There's room for improvement. We want to get to that point where we don't have, we're okay with the auditor and have a good opinion from the auditor. But my concern is really on the items that are still in a position or a condition as being noted as findings in 2018. And my question to management really is, what is your timeline to address these items? Because, you know, if you've got items that are findings for more than one consecutive year, that becomes an issue for the city. It becomes an issue to the city in terms of getting out of financial oversight from the state. So even as you go into the next audit for 2019, it kind of behooves you to almost take whatever steps are necessary to address those findings. Now, I'm happy to find out that you're making progress on the capital inventory. And we heard from the finance director regarding that. But there are a number of significant findings here that really impact your financial report. One of the things that a city should be doing on a monthly basis is providing a financial report to you as the commission. And that financial report should at some point be reconciled to the books and to the cash balances, which are findings on here. And if you don't have a way of understanding where your financial position is during the year, that's like driving a car without a speedometer. You don't know how fast you're going. It's like driving a plane without a GPS. You don't know what direction you're going in. You need these indicators to help you to manage. So it's important that the city moves forward with understanding what the timelines are and then jumping on it immediately.
That's excellent comment and also question. Manager?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'm gonna ask, did you hear that question, Mrs. Czar? Come to the podium. You probably can answer that question better since you're our finance, interim finance director.
Good evening, everyone. Jerry Lazar again. So, you know, the city has been working simultaneously to prepare the fiscal year 19 audit. The city has been working simultaneously to prepare the fiscal 19 audit, as well as trying to make sure that the fiscal 20 items have been reconciled, and also working on fiscal 21 at the same time. And we are short-staffed. We have been heavily trying to recruit for staff for the finance director position, for the senior accountant role, as well as the accountant role. And the city has been having challenges in terms of people who are applying for the positions. For example, we had 9 candidates who recently applied, and only 1 candidate was available for an interview. So we are working to try to get monthly financial reports out to the city. I know in previous discussions with management, we were going to aim to get a quarterly report at least for fiscal 21. But as I mentioned earlier, we have been working heavily on getting everything reconciled for Mr. Brunson's team for fiscal 19. And that is causing a delay in us being able to provide this report to you consistently at this particular moment.
I'd like to recognize any further comments, Mr. Hefner or Manager?
No, sir. Thank you, Ms. Lazar.
Just one thing.
You got another question, sir?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would suggest to the board that, you know, on a monthly basis, you get an update to understand where you are with the activities. And I would suggest, if you haven't already done so, ask the finance director to provide for you a project timeline for all of these items. I'm sure she has already have that internally, but it needs to be shared with, if it hasn't been shared with you already, it needs to be shared with you so you guys know what position you are in terms of having all of these activities addressed. That'd just be my recommendation.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hepburn. Take that to heart. During my operational meetings with management, that's one question I always continue to ask, and that was a response. In getting out all these audits and the fact they've been understaffed. That's been a constant response, is that is the staffing, and also bank reconciliations and audits has prevented us from getting that information. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is very, very important. With that, I see a comment from Board Member Johnson.
Yeah, thanks again, Mr. Mayor. I concur with Board Member Hepburn, and I will strongly suggest that used to be on the agenda until December of 14, it came off the agenda. Every meeting, the finance director came and gave us an update because the auditor works for the commission. The resources and the tracking data come from staff, but the comments, and that was one of my first remarks that I made, was the internal control comments from the audit. Those responsibility used to be, I don't know what it is now, used to be the responsibility of the commission. And that's where I think we got to curb that in and address each one so that you can come up with a timeline and accountability. Because even if you look at the IT system that you all was talking about putting into building and licensing, it's a lot of other information need to go into that. So I think now, as we got the audit committee established and working along with the commission, those are some things, even if we have to do Zoom or whatever, that need to be put on the table because there's a lot of data there. But I think because of the turnover, we just have not gripped it at this point. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mr. Brunson.
Okay, the next page shares some additional comments. And, as you can see, many of these have been were implemented and cleared for 2018. So there is progress that was, that is being made or had been made. It talks about previously going back to 14, there were checks outstanding in the bank reconciliation for over 12 months. So, I mean, that's a pretty long time to have an outstanding item in your bank recs. But again, much of that had been cleared in 18, no longer there. We talked about budgets being done and budget and actual. So there had been progress in our last visit. One of the pet peeves, again, is the upgrading of the accounting system. I'm not, from a priority point of view, I'm sure you have other burning issues, but over time, it's something that ultimately should be done in our view. There are journal entries that, just weren't approved, that were just being entered in the systems by a number of different individuals. So the team has implemented and gotten the proper approvals and controls around journal entries. In the past, there were some of the deficit cash balances, as you see, and lastly, some items regarding your pension plan remittances and the timely remittances of plans primarily. So all of these items were pretty much cleared in 18, with the exception of upgrading the accounting system. And the last item was just the supporting documents regarding some of the grants and expenditures back in 2016 for your water and sewer revolving funds. So certainly an overview of grants. The details of those comments, I'm sure, are available to you. And that would conclude an overview for this workshop from my perspective.
Through the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Brunson. Mr. Board Member Hepburn.
Yeah, on slide, I just have a general question. On slide number 30, there was a presentation of overview of revenue for governmental activities titled Other Taxes. What's the composition of that category, other taxes? Out of curiosity.
Do you recall, I don't know, sales tax, not other tax, that wouldn't be in there.
Okay.
It's like more licensing kind of things. It's just generic, some tax awards, but we could certainly provide you the detail. Well,
yeah, because sales taxes would probably be covered under intergovernmental.
right. You're
That's
right.
coming from
That's
the
why
state.
I pulled back on that one.
Yeah. So,
Give me a moment. I brought a trial balance actually here. So I'll cheat.
yeah, because it went up, so I was curious what that composition would be.
I don't know if some of the fines and
If you can't find it now, that's okay. Just let me know later. No big deal.
Right.
It's minor.
okay. Yeah, I'd have to be sure, get back with you. I'd have to get back with you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Great workshop.
Thank you, Board Member Johnson. Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Bronson. Thank you for leading through the workshop. There's a lot of information given, and just appreciate you extending this opportunity for our new members on the commission. It's very thorough, and I do see a few items that I actually was a bit concerned about. In particular, the item about the property taxes and ultimately how that revenue, or how the amounts were increased, but that revenue seemed to dip on the city side. So that's definitely one point of concern of mine. In addition to that, I think of the recent, I think it was the internal control comments. It was the one that pertained to our physical assets. I know that we are, I guess, dealing with that particular one, but I know that, that was a big point of concern, being that that was literally the only finding that was going to prevent us from receiving a clean opinion. So, Mr. Mayor, I would like to have, I guess, a response from management relative to those two items. And I know that, I guess, management might be putting together a timeline or something more concrete later on when to address the larger concerns, but those two in particular were items that stood out to me. I just would like to speak to them about that. Thank you.
Mr. Manager? Yeah, two questions. One about the increase in taxes, but the dip in revenues. And then the other one was about internal controls, but I didn't catch that one too clearly.
No. Well, the internal controls, I said we're addressing it. No, I don't need a response to that, so I'm good there. Just the other one.
Dip in taxes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you gotta
Okay,
speak up. We
can
can't,
you bring the mic closer?
like it's off.
Oh, it's off.
Right into this. Good evening, everyone. Jerry Lazar again. So if I remember from the slide, yes, the tax base increased, but that's different from collection activity, right? So the tax base increased, but we maybe not necessarily be collecting everything from the property taxes and tangible personal property taxes. And one of the things that we notice is that we're collecting a lot of delinquent taxes from previous years. So just because the tax base increases doesn't necessarily mean you're collecting all of the tax revenue. That's sometimes where you have a difference in the figure. If that answers your question.
Okay.
And then the second question was about.
No, that's the only question, but I have a follow-up to that question, Mrs. Lazar. So I guess, where are we dropping the ball with collections? Like, is it, because I know we had some issues with user fees and that sort of thing, and we made a transition to move those fees to the property tax bill. So I guess, I thought that was the preferred method, given, the move. So what challenges have we experience, I guess, as it relates to that?
So
Like,
remember,
how
the city doesn't collect property taxes. Property taxes is
county.
collected on the tax bill.
Yeah.
It's paid directly to the county, and the city gets the bulk of the share of our property tax collection around November, December. And then we starts to taper down a bit. We'll start to get payments in January, February, March, and then towards, I want to say July, we start to get some of that additional collection that may come in that's delinquent throughout the year. So the city does not control that. We get the payments directly from the county. And basically what the county provides us is what is current versus what's delinquent. And it looks like the delinquent portion seems to be getting a little higher, where we're collecting maybe property taxes from previous years that were not collectible. So we don't have a lot of control over that.
I got it. So, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Through the mayor,
Um,
follow-up question. So one of the beauties of the state of Florida is different than any other state in the United States, is they have a law that allows each county to sell tax certificates. So I know for my city, we seldom end up in a position where we're off significantly in our sales taxes, because if the taxpayer does not pay the tax, somebody's going to buy the tax certificate. And out of 100 properties, 99 of them are going to have a tax certificate, which means your taxes are going to be paid. So the question got to be something, I mean, it's got to be something else going on there, because the majority of the city's taxes, I guarantee you, are being picked up by somebody that's going to buy a tax certificate, because it's a quick way to make 3, 4, 5%. So I would suggest further research may need to be done there. Typically, you're going to get tax certificates sold on most delinquent properties.
Okay, so we can definitely dive into that if that's something that you wish. We can contact the property appraiser's office and get more data on that to provide some kind of analysis to you.
Also, I have a question or comment from Mr. Anathan, our budget administrator. You have the floor.
Yes.
Sorry, good evening, Bob Anathan. There may be a collection issue, but in 2018, the millage rate came down. It was in 2017, the millage rate was 10.0. 2018, it was 8.999. So it's a 10% reduction. So I think that's a lot of what you saw on that particular chart.
Thank you, Bob.
Now, I was gonna say, okay, if I'm hearing Mr. Anathan correctly, is as a result of the decrease in our millage rate, which was pretty much at its highest point, which is 10 mils.
It could have definitely been part of the reasoning, but I don't have the data in front of me, so I'll rely on Mr. Anathan's analysis.
Okay, and that's all the information I really want to know. What was the, I guess, driver for the sudden decrease in our revenue, given that we simultaneously had exponential growth in our tax base? That was just alarming. But thank you, Mrs. Lazar, and I look forward to your analysis of that issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Vice Mayor Williams.
I didn't have a question, but I did want to thank Mr. Brunson and his team and staff for this very thorough audit report and workshop that you delivered today. Also, I just want to echo Board Member Hepburn's sentiments. I do believe that if you plan with the end in mind, then you are able to drive the car, and as the commission will know where we're going and how to effectively commission effectively if we're given the tools and know where we're going and how to drive the car in specific stops of the road and not at the end of the trip. So, so that we can make thorough and decisions on the board. So I do agree with you, Board Member Hepburn, and I appreciate you bringing that to our forefront. Thank you. But again, thank you for the audit and your staff.
Thank you for having.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Mr. Brunson, I'm looking at the last audit report in 2018 and your letter on report on the internal audit controls. And in the second paragraph, last line, you say, accordingly, we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of Opa-locka's internal control. What exactly do you mean by effectiveness of our internal control?
Well, remember we talked about those 14 different type of audits. There are certain audits that can be done that specifically render an opinion on the internal control environment. When you do the financial audit or the nature of our audit, we do test controls, we look at controls and perhaps rely on them, but it just is saying we aren't here to give an opinion on your internal control. That's a different scope of work. We look at it in connection with the work we do in the financial statement audit.
Would that be more of a operational audit of our financial controls? Is that?
That is, yeah, would be a specific kind of, call an operational audit or specifically an internal control review to, to test your systems and processes. It's a much deeper dive than what we would do as a, in connection with the financial audit.
Got it.
But that's standard language in any audit report, though. So you understand, it's standard language in any financial audit report.
Okay. All right. Do you have any closing thoughts from our board members online or here on the dais?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Davis?
Thank you. I just had one question because I know that we had a presentation on the CAFR, and of course, that's where we want to go as a government to ultimately have our finances in order and have them sound. I remember in the presentation you mentioned, I guess it was mentioned that financial statements are provided citywide, I guess across departments. What is our current structure? Like how those, I know of course when we have our independent audit, those statements are produced. But then are they currently being provided citywide on an annual basis? Like when we do our audit, or like how far are we from that goal, I guess, Mr. Bronson? I know it's probably a staff question.
Management team, but whenever the annual financial report has been produced, or the past, there are two sets of statements. One is when they say entity-wide, it's full accrual basis, considering all your assets, all the liabilities. And then you transition, they talked about reconciling one to the other. Typically you manage on a fund basis, modified accrual. So on your day-to-day management, it's what's known as modified accrual, where you do your budget to actual by your different funds. You typically have, all your different general funds. When you do your budgets, I'm sure you see police, general fund, recreation, and individual line items under those budgets. But yes, to answer your question, the city is, at least annually, we must produce that document to give opinions on the financial statements. So it's being done. Can't address how frequently it's being done throughout the course of the year, but at the end of the year, we must do it.
And to Mr. Hepburn's point, you kind of want, and Vice Mayor Williams, we want to kind of get ahead of those things. So in your experience, in your auditing experience and working with different municipal governments, I guess what is your recommendation as far as a timeline for reviewing funds throughout the year? Like, should we receive them quarterly? Looking at finances throughout the year, like what's, in your professional opinion, what's reasonable?
My opinion, the minimum time would be quarterly, but as frequently as you can, your
Absolutely.
goal would be monthly to at least take a look at your budgets to actual, some financial data. It doesn't have to be entity-wide, but minimally, I would suggest quarterly.
Quarterly. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brunson.
Through the mayor, I just want to commend the staff, the manager of the city of Opa-locka for putting together this workshop. I want to commend the CPA firm Brunson for their dedication to working with the city over these 4 or 5 years. And I just want to say, I believe in time, we'll get to a position where we have a good opinion on our audits. It's just going to take time. Nothing. If we didn't get in this situation overnight, we're not going to get out of this situation overnight. But it's just going to take discipline, and I think we'll get there. We have the right team. We just need to get more people on the team.
Thank you for those comments, but I'd also like to echo that. It's going to, everything's trending in the right direction. You just have to stay at it and not get laxed since the progress is being made, you want to continue that progress.
Mr. Mayor, I would be remiss if I do not thank Ms. Lazier and her team, the finance team. Thank you all so much. I know that, yes, kudos. Yes, clap it up. I know that every time I have a finance question myself, your doors are always open, calls, whatever, the lines of communication are there. And I just really want to thank you all for the work that you all do on a daily basis. Again, always having that, y'all always say, y'all always know I'm always talking about communication. Having more dialogue, more communication allows us to pivot and know how to make sound decisions. So, but thank you all so much. Thank you, and Mr. Brunson and the finance team.
Awesome. All right, so I would like to echo the sentiments of board members and colleagues on Mr. Brunson, staff, and management for really moving us in this direction. It is very clear to those that are watching and that can see that Opa-locka is shifting tremendously in the right direction. And I like the fact that we had very clear goals coming out of this workshop. Number one, to get a timeline to address all the findings that have been noted in these audits past. 2, getting consistent monthly financial reports and at least reviewing them on a quarterly basis at a minimum, if not monthly as a commission and board, so we can move it forward. 3 is looking at that analysis into that dip in revenue so that we're clear about what that is so we can get that moving forward. 4, let's not get laxed in this direction that we're going. This has been a huge Herculean effort of this commission, management, and staff in turning this ship around. We are turning, but we must be consistent in getting those things brought to our attention. So I look forward to continuing. I know one thing that we have traditionally done that kind of lacks was getting that update on the 4 major challenges during our commission meeting. And I always speak about finances number 1, because if we don't get our finances together, everything else suffers, from our employees' pay to our parks and recreation to our streets. All those things are at the mercy of us making sure we have a proper internal controls. So much respect for everyone that has been engaged in this process and really helping to turn this city around. Really appreciate you, and thank you for Mr. Hepburn and our board members for recommending that we have this joint workshop today, and for management and staff for organizing it. It's a very thorough presentation. So much respect to everyone involved. So with that, I believe that that concludes all of our comments and questions for this evening. I would like to get a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Burke,
Second.
second by Vice Mayor Williams. Everyone have a good evening. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.